Our learning target is I can solve problems involving fractions of shapes. Your success criteria is I will know I am successful when I can identify and shade fractions of shapes. To understand fractions, we're going to think about what we already know. We know this is a rectangle. We also know this rectangle has 2 rows and 6 columns. The area of this rectangle is 12. It is 6 plus 6, 6 in the top row and 6 tiles in the bottom row makes 12. How could we break this rectangle into 2 equal shares? Well, we could divide it right down the middle. So we have the top row of 6 tiles and the bottom row. And what we have done is broken this rectangle into halves. We have half, 1/2 at the top and 1/2 at the bottom. And we'll talk a little bit more about what this 1/2 is made up of, but I just want you to understand that when we break something into equal shares, they have to be equal. They have to be the same size. Here's another way to break that rectangle up. We have, again, notice 6 tiles here and 6 tiles here. We have 1/2 of the rectangle here and 1/2 of the rectangle here. They are equal shares. So what is a fraction? Well, a fraction is a part of a whole. And if you look at a fraction, there's 2 numbers. The top number tells me the part, and the bottom number tells me how many parts there are in the whole thing. So we're going to look at that by going over here and looking at some fraction bars. So I have some fraction bars here, and this is a whole bar. Notice there is no part there. I haven't divided this bar into anything. But let's look at this bar. It's the same size as the whole. But notice what I did. I divided this whole into 2 pieces. So I'm going to shade the whole bar. There's my whole. And now I'm going to come down here to this bar. And instead of having the whole bar this time, I've sliced it in half. So I have 2 equal parts. Remember, that's important for fractions. So I have 1 part here and 1 part here, and they're the same. So there are 2 parts in this whole. I'm going to shade one of them. So now look over here at my fraction. Remember I talked about the top number being the part that is shaded? Well, I have 1 part, that's what the 1 is on top there. And this line, when I see that line, I say out of. 1 out of 1 part out of 2, because there were 2 parts in all. But I only have 1 green part shaded. I only have 1 part shaded green. So let's go look at this bar. What do you notice? Well, I've taken that hole that we took, the hole that we have, but I've divided it into 3 equal parts. 1, 2, 3. Now, I have 0 parts shaded right now. I have 0 out of 3. But if I shade one of them, I now have 1 out of 3. And there's another way to say that. We can say a third. I have 1/3 of this bar shaded green. Now I could shade 2/3. And what happened to my fraction? 2 out of 3. Do you see what happened? I don't have 1/3 shaded now. I have 2. Well, let's unshade it. And what happened to my fraction? I now have 1 out of 3. And a real marvelous thing happens when I shade not just 2 out of 3, but when I shade 3 out of 3, what do you notice? I have the whole bar, don't I? I have 3 parts out of 3 parts in all, 3 out of 3. I just have the whole bar. So let's get rid of that, and let's go down here. What do you notice this time? Yes, my bottom number is 4, because this fraction is broken into 4 equal, or this bar is broken into 4 equal parts. So instead of 3 like I had here, or 2 like I had here, I have broken this into 4 parts. And I notice that as I'm building these, my pieces are getting smaller. as I have to increase the number of parts I divide my whole into, it makes my pieces smaller. And that makes sense. If you have a candy bar and you share it with two people, you each get one half and your pieces are big. But if you two more friends join you and you now have to split your candy bar with four people, the pieces get smaller because you have to split them more ways. So let's shade one of these fourths. So we have 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, and 4/4, but we don't have anything shaded yet. So I'm going to shade one. Now we have 1/4. 1/4 of my bar is shaded green. Do you see that? And I could shade another one. What would the fraction be? Say it in your head. Yeah, it would be 2/4. And if we shaded another one, what would the fraction be? Say it in your head. Yeah, it would be 3/4. And just like we saw with thirds, if I shade that last fourth, what's the fraction going to be? 4/4. 4 parts out of 4 pieces in all, which makes it one whole. Okay. Does the same thing work for circles? This is a shape, just like this is a rectangle, it's a shape. Well, let's look at this hole. There's the whole circle. Do you see that? Now I've taken my circle and divided it into two, and I'm going to shade one out of the two pieces. Can you see that fraction? 1 out of 2. And now I have thirds. I've taken my circle, I've divided it into 3 equal parts, and now I have zero. I don't have any right now. I have 0 thirds shaded, but I'm going to shade one of them, and I now have 1/3. And just like up here, I could shade another one, and that would give me 2 out of 3. 2/3. 2 out of 3. I'm going to take that off, and we'll come over here to the circle, the hole that is divided into 4 parts now. Right now, I have 0 out of 4. I'm going to shade one, and now I have 1 out of 4. 1/4. I'm going to shade one more, and now what do I have? 2/4. 2 out of 4. And if I shaded one more, I'd have 3/4. And one more, I'd have 4/4. And of course, once we get to 4/4, we now have the whole thing. So we'll take that back off. And you can see that I can shade fractions in circles. I can shade fractions in rectangles. And if I had a square here, I could shade fractions of squares as well. As long as I can break up a shape into equal parts, I can come up with fractions of a whole. All right, let's go back to our lesson. Your success criteria today was to identify and shade fractions of shapes. You will have your opportunity to do so at independent practice.